It does not do well to dwell on dreams and forget to live. These are the words of Albus Dumbledore, written by JK Rowling, who is, of course, the author of the Harry Potter book series, which spawned 8 movies, a theme park, and a growing number of spin-off films. In many ways, she defies a lot of the assumptions we have about wealthy, successful people. Why? Because her parents never went to college. They both came from poor backgrounds, and Rowling herself overcame repeated rejections from many different publishers before she found success as one of the richest and most widely read authors in history. But just 8 years before all this, she was divorced, and she was raising a daughter completely on her own. Depressed and finding herself at one of the lowest points in her life, she was living almost entirely on welfare and social assistance. So how did she manage to do all this in such a short amount of time? This is the story of JK Rowling and her unique number pattern, and how she went from impoverished single mother to one of the wealthiest people in the world. JK Rowling was the oldest of 2 daughters. She grew up always knowing that she wanted to be a writer. And even as a child, she would write stories and tell them to her younger sister, Diane. When she was 9 years old, her family moved near the Forest of Dean, where she would spend the rest of her childhood. This forest would serve as inspiration for her book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It was also near a cemetery where she worked at a local church, earning extra money by doing chores and cleaning. All of these surroundings would serve as rich material for her stories that she would write years later. But as the young Rowling was growing up, her parents were getting worried about what they considered to be an overactive imagination. In their opinion, her storytelling was an unfortunate quirk that would never be able to pay a mortgage, or anything else for that matter. Her teenage years were especially hard. When she was only 16, her mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Her mother would lose feeling in her arms and legs, and her sense of balance got worse and worse over time. This was devastating for everyone in the family, and Rowling's father became especially distant and difficult to deal with during this time. She describes how she desperately tried to get her father's approval, but there came a point in her life where she couldn't do that anymore. These challenges, as hard as they were, also informed her writing. Rowling went to college and graduated from the University of Exeter in 1986, where she studied French and classics. She found a job working at the research desk for Amnesty International, doing translation. But she didn't enjoy the work, and she found it hard to focus on the job. She describes her work there like this: "All I ever liked about working in offices was being able to type stories on the computer when no one was watching. And in her spare moments, she scribbled stories in the margins of her pad." It wasn't until 1990 that she started really thinking about the Harry Potter character while sitting on a train. But 1 year later, on New Year's Day, in 1991, she would have the hardest day in her life, when her mother died. Rowling was 25, and she struggled deeply with this news. "I couldn't grasp the enormity of my mother dying. Barely a day goes by when I don't think of her. There would be so much to tell her, impossibly much." Her mother died before Rowling found any success with her writing. By this time, she had already been writing a draft of Harry Potter for 6 months. After her mother's death, the basic plot didn't change, but everything deepened and darkened. It had a profound effect on her. In many ways, the Harry Potter series was an attempt to reclaim her childhood through her creativity and imagination. As she became more and more frustrated with her secretary work, she decided to move to Portugal to teach English. It was here that she met and married a Portuguese television journalist named Jorge Arantes. They had a child together who they named Jessica, but their relationship was difficult and tumultuous. They separated in November of 1993, This was another devastating blow, and it marked the beginning of a very tough time financially. She describes feeling numb and cold, and it would leave her wondering if she could ever feel truly happy, ever again. But it was in Portugal that Rowling started to seriously write Harry Potter, and she carried a suitcase filled with papers covered with stories. She decided to move back to England at the end of 1993. Without a job and with nothing but an old typewriter, she would sit in different cafes to write, and often brought her baby along, who slept in a stroller next to her. During this time, she was surviving on government welfare. She describes this as a very difficult time. There's no way I could have written this book if I hadn't had a few years where I'd been as poor as it's possible to be in the UK without being homeless. I would say to any single parent currently feeling the weight of negative judgment that I'm prouder of my years as a single mother than of any other part in my life. It's for this reason that even today, she often criticizes politicians who try to cut back on government welfare programs. But she would use all of this as fuel for her writing. During this time, she channeled these dark thoughts to create the Dementors in her Harry Potter story. In 1995, after she finished her first Harry Potter manuscript, she sent it out to publishers, where it was rejected over and over again. After a year, she found a small publisher that agreed to print 500 copies of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for a £2,500 advance. They also insisted that Rowling use a pen name because they were worried that boys wouldn't want to read a book that was written by a woman. So she chose the initials J, which stand for her real first name Joanne, and the initial K for Kathleen, who was her grandmother. The book became an enormous hit. By March of 1999, it already sold 300,000 copies and won her several awards, including the Nestle Smarties Book Prize. In 1998, the film studio Warner Brothers bought the rights to the first two Harry Potter books. Rowling released her second book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, in July of 1998, to huge acclaim and sales. After writing her fourth book in the series, she was starting to feel the pressures of success. She describes finding it hard to write, which had never happened to her before. The intensity of public scrutiny was something she hadn't prepared for. Her meteoric rise meant that she didn't have time to process her new level of fame. When the movie version of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone came out in 2001, it was a huge box office hit. The movie grossed $974 million, and it marked the beginning of what would become one of the most successful movie franchises in history. By 2004, Forbes reported that Rowling had become the first ever billionaire who built her fortune from writing books. In the years that followed, her books sold more than 450 million copies, and Universal Studios opened a theme park based on the Harry Potter universe, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. JK Rowling's path follows the classic rags to riches story. But what can her numbers tell us about the path she took to get there? She was born on July 31st, 1965. This makes her a 5-life path. In numerology, the life path represents the basic lesson that must be learned in order to find meaning and fulfillment in one's lifetime. The 5-life path is drawn to variety, travel, adventure, and most of all, freedom. 5-life paths are endlessly curious about the world, and they look for ways to experience as much as they can. In their work, they love to be involved in many different areas at the same time, and they resist being tied down to any one area. They do well at adapting to change and finding new challenges and directions. This push towards personal freedom tends to lead them to unconventional careers, and they're often attracted to self-employment. 5-life paths also have excellent communication skills and a keen understanding of people. But at the same time, they can be impulsive and prone to distractions. There's a restlessness about them that pushes them to explore new things, but it can also make them dissatisfied with their achievements. We can see this in the way she went to work as a secretary for Amnesty International and left when it became too restrictive, and when it became clear that it wasn't a place where she could grow and stretch her wings. We also see this when she left England to teach English in a foreign country. And it wasn't until she returned to her childhood passion for writing that she began to really feel like she was on the right path. In an interview, JK Rowling describes how, for as long as she could remember, she wanted more than anything to be a writer. But it never occurred to her that she could make it a career. At the beginning, her goal was very modest. She wanted to do the best she could with the talent she had. And she also describes having a strong fear of failure. But this only began to change when, in her words, I stopped pretending that I was anything other than what I was. In many ways, this was one of the most important keys to her success. Rowling says that if I succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed at the one area where I felt I truly belonged: writing. What this reveals is the importance of authenticity and listening to your intuition, because sometimes not getting what you want can actually be an incredible blessing. The second factor in her numerology profile is what's called the expression number, which is based on her name. Although she writes under the name JK Rowling, this is a pen name. Her full name, according to Wikipedia, is Joanne Rowling. This gives her a 4 expression number. People with a 4 expression number are reliable, they're meticulous, they have a strong sense of duty, and they take their obligations to their family very seriously. At the same time, they take a methodical and systematic approach to solving problems. They pay careful attention to the details, they take action, and they work to turn their dreams into a reality. They're also tremendously honest, and in many ways they strongly identify with the innocence of children. And for this reason, they often see a great deal of themselves in the imagination and simplicity of childhood. At the same time, they can also find themselves becoming too narrowly focused on their work. In many cases, this can lead to unhealthy levels of workaholism, where they can find themselves sacrificing their own emotional needs. They can also show a tendency towards being too cautious, too conservative, or too serious. We also see this in the way JK Rowling has dealt with failure and rejection in her career. In her words, some failure in life is unavoidable. It's impossible to live life without failing at something, unless you've lived so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you've failed by default. And it's this resilience, this ability to persist in the face of hardship, that reveals the second important key to her success. In her words, life is hard and complicated, and it's beyond our total control. Having the humility to understand this gives us the strength to survive. It's interesting to note that Rowling's 5 life path vibration and her 4 expression number are in many ways opposite influences. The 5 life path seeks freedom, adventure, and variety. It thrives in times of change and uncertainty. On the other hand, the 4 life path is a grounding energy that bears the burden of responsibility, work, and duty to family. These are the forces that have pushed and pulled at each other throughout the course of her life. But they also help her. She can draw on each of these vibrations at different times. One of the important challenges for Rowling is to bring these opposing influences together in a way that serves her goals. Of course, these are only 2 factors in her numerology chart. Her overall profile would reveal a much more complete and complex picture. It would have been so easy for Rowling to take the more cautious path, to stay at a secure job as a secretary, even if it didn't inspire her creatively. It would have been easy to stay in a relationship that might have felt familiar but wasn't fulfilling her. But if she'd done those things, we wouldn't have the Harry Potter series, and we wouldn't have her example as a divorced single mother, struggling financially, and on the brink of poverty to an accomplished author who sold more than 450 million books. That's it for this video. Thanks so much for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please like and subscribe. It really does help me get my work out there, and it helps me to bring more content like this to you. If there's a famous person you'd like me to profile in a future video, let me know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.